I do believe there is a connection between Nineveh and Mystery Babylon that we read about in the book of Revelation. So therefore, the book of Nahum also has a yet future aspect to it. And we will explore the possible link between Nineveh and Mystery Babylon as we make our way through Nahum. And this is something that I felt like I was picking up just in my readings of Nahum. Also, my readings of Ezekiel with Tyre, and then Isaiah and Jeremiah with Babylon. I think Babylon, Tyre, and Nineveh combine to form a picture of Mystery Babylon that we read about in Revelation 17 and 18. So I've had that personal view for a number of years. I was surprised to learn that scholars also view Nahum as having an influence on later eschatological and apocalyptic literature. I wasn't expecting to find that when I was reading the scholars, to see that they also make that connection. Dwayne Christensen, in his commentary on Nahum, even says that the whore of Babylon may contain an allusion to Nahum 3 verse 4. And he says, quote, "Like the personified figure of Babylon in the book of Revelation, the personification of Nineveh becomes the symbol of evil, and the destruction of Nineveh represents the defeat of the forces of evil at the end of time," end quote. And I was equally surprised to learn that the early church held a similar view. In the works of Jerome, Theodoret, and Cyril, among others, the book of Nahum was often interpreted as a source of comfort, which again, remember, is the meaning of Nahum's name, to the Christians suffering heavy persecution under the Roman emperors. That they viewed it as God would one day avenge the church as he avenged Judah. And they viewed Nineveh as even a symbol of the devil. And the reformers also, specifically Martin Luther, he drew a line from Nahum, from the book of Nahum, and the destruction of Nineveh all the way to the Pope, who he said was, quote, being destroyed by the word of God. And John Calvin also drew comfort from the book, similar to the early church fathers, about how God would vindicate the church and avenge them on the persecutors, who in the days of the reformers was, the Catholic Church was the one who was killing a lot of the leaders of the Reformation, those who were embracing the doctrines of salvation by faith. And as far as the Jewish writers go, this was another thing I thought was quite interesting, is that Nahum chapter 2, verse 8 through 13, is the only extended Old Testament quote to be found in all the writings of Josephus. And this same passage was also found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, indicating that the Qumran community likewise held it in high regard. In the Qumran community, they actually had a commentary on Nahum where they applied chapter 2, verse 8 through 13 to the rulers of the 2nd century BC. So I was just very interested to when I was reading about that it seems like Christians today, I read a few guys, commentators that made the comment that the book of Nahum might be the least read book in the entire Bible. Now, whether that is or isn't true, or at least the least read among the prophets, I don't know if that's true or not, but to see the way that the book was interpreted by the early church, the Jewish community just before the time of Christ, and then just after the time of Christ, all the way to the reformers, and then all the way to the modern day scholars who see a connection there to the Mystery Babylon in the end times. The book of Nahum is very important to our understanding of these things, and I was pretty excited when I saw that in the works that I was reading, because I myself, like I said, have had that view for a while. So that's going to be something that's going to be fun to explore as we go through the book of Nahum, just seeing the possible connections that we can glean for possibly in-time applications of the book of Nahum. Notice there the repetitive mention by both Isaiah and Nahum of sorcery, of occult practices. Isaiah mentions it of Babylon, and Nahum mentions it of Nineveh. And this hubris, the hubris of the claims of absolute supremacy, whether by Nineveh or Babylon, was echoed centuries later by Mystery Babylon in Revelation 18 verse 7, where John records her, and it says the following: "For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, I am not a widow, and I will never see grief." And John also, in his chapters about Mystery Babylon, also mentions sorcery and occult things in association with Mystery Babylon. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, I do believe there's a strong tie between Nineveh, Babylon, and Tyre. And I think those are the foundation, those cities, the judgment passages against them are the foundation that form Mystery Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18. So we see Nahum, Zephaniah, Isaiah, and John all prophesied the complete destruction of the one who makes these claims of absolute supremacy, absolute superiority, who do occult witchcraft, sorcery, and spells to seduce and deceive the nations. Nahum is obviously addressing Nineveh in his own time, but the language points to an eschatological fulfillment. And interestingly, Isaiah does the same thing. This isn't unique to Nahum. Micah does this very often as well. But my example that I'm going to quote right now is from Isaiah chapter 14. And we'll be bouncing in and out of Isaiah 14 a couple times tonight or today. But notice here, the verses that I'm going to read Isaiah 14:12, 14:22, and then 14:24 through 27. And notice that in these verses, Isaiah is going to address Hallel ben Shakar, then he's going to address Babylon, and then he's going to address the Assyrian, all within a few verses. And as strange as it may sound, these titles are, very broadly speaking, somewhat interchangeable, because the king of Babylon and the Assyrian are types of Satan. And many view Hallel ben Shakar, which is often referred to as Lucifer, also as Satan. So I'll read these verses in Isaiah and see if you agree. So Isaiah says, "How are you fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn? How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low." And then verse 22, "I will rise up against them, declares Yahweh of hosts, and will cut off from Babylon name and remnant, descendants and posterity, declares Yahweh." And then verse 24 to 27, "Yahweh of hosts has sworn, as I have planned, so shall it be, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains trample him underfoot, and his yoke shall depart from them, and his burden from their shoulder. This is the purpose that is purposed concerning the whole earth. And this is the hand that is stretched out over all the nations. For Yahweh of hosts has purposed, and who will annul it? His hand is stretched out, and who will turn it back?" So notice there, especially the last few verses there, when he's talking about the Assyrian, when we continue through Nahum, some of this terminology is going to come up in Nahum. But the similarity there between the judgment of Lucifer, Babylon, and the Assyrian, to me, is significant, and it causes us to, again, think, as Ezekiel, when he's talking about Tyre in Ezekiel 28, and he talks about the prince of Tyre, and then he talks about the king of Tyre. And when he talks about the king of Tyre, he says, "You were in Eden." So the king of Tyre would be another reference to Satan, or another very powerful divine rebel. So the king of Tyre, the king of Babylon, the Assyrian, and Lucifer being connected with Satan, again, is another evidence for my view, more evidence that I would offer in support of my view that Babylon, Nineveh, and Tyre have to do with or are the background for John's mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation, as that Satan appears in those passages as well as the beast and the false prophet in destroying mystery Babylon. And I think all these Old Testament prophecies form that matrix of ideas that John brings to fulfillment there in Revelation with mystery Babylon and the beast. Revelation, the second half of the book of Revelation. So Isaiah chapter 47 is a judgment on Babylon. But I'm going to read a few verses out of that chapter, and we'll note the similarities to Nahum's judgment on Nineveh. And then I'm also going to read a few verses from Revelation chapter 18, and we'll notice the similarities to the description of mystery Babylon. So first, Isaiah's comments, and specifically what we're going for here is the idea of sorcery. So we'll notice specifically Isaiah's comments on Babylon's use of sorcery in Isaiah 47, verse 9, and then verse 12 and 13, which reads, "These two things will happen to you suddenly in one day, loss of children and widowhood. They will happen to you in their entirety, in spite of your many sorceries and the potency of your spells. So take your stand with your spells and your many sorceries, which you have wearied yourself with from your youth. Perhaps you will be able to succeed. Perhaps you will inspire terror. You are worn out with your many consultations, so let the astrologers stand and save you, those who observe the stars, those who predict monthly what will happen to you." So there Isaiah is mocking them. And as I mentioned, prostitution, evil trade, and sorcery are all descriptors of mystery Babylon as well. And after John records the judgment of the great prostitute, we read in Revelation 18, 23, and 24, it says, "All this will happen because your merchants were the nobility of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. In her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and all of those slaughtered on the earth." So there we see the linkage from John with sorcery and bloodshed, which both have been mentioned in this taunt song, in this accusation against Nineveh. And the combination of prostitution and sorcery come together in the person of Jezebel. In 2 Kings 9:22, we read, when Joram saw Jehu, he asked, "Do you come in peace, Jehu?" He answered, "What peace can there be as long as there is so much prostitution and sorcery from your mother Jezebel?" And the word that Jehu uses for sorcery is the same word that's used here in Nahum. And that word is not used all that often in the Old Testament. It's, I think, less than 10 times it's used, if I remember correctly. So as Nineveh's treachery is laid out in terms of female prostitution, the punishment is rendered accordingly. And in the Septuagint, the word translated filth is the same word Jesus uses for the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24:15. This word is also used by the Septuagint translators 3 times in Daniel, and every time it's referring to the abomination of desolation. This word is also used of mystery Babylon, which the usage of this word serves as another linkage between Nineveh and mystery Babylon. So Revelation 17, verse 1 and 2, and then 4 through 6 says, "Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, 'Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on the earth have become drunk.' The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup," and here we go, "a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations." So there it is again. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So there we have the idea again of bloodshed being linked to all this. And it's the bloodshed of God's people. So again, this brings to mind the idea of the avenger of blood. And Mystery Babylon, the great prostitute, has filth or abomination, as again it's the same Greek word, and it's written on her forehead. So in the throughout the scriptures, filth is often, if not usually, related to the abominable pagan gods. So God throwing filth on Nineveh may contain the idea that he's throwing their abominable, filthy gods back at them. Nineveh has been judged in part for using supernatural powers that are hostile rivals of Yahweh, which again, that goes back to the idea of sorcery and their veneration of the gods Asher, Ishtar, and others. And worshiping false gods is an abomination to the one true God. And certain gods were even called, quote, the abomination in the Old Testament. Specifically, that phrase is used of Molech and Chemosh. It is interesting that the Assyrian, is one of the Old Testament metaphors for Satan and the Antichrist. The king of Tyre in the writings of Ezekiel and the king of Babylon in the writings of Isaiah and Jeremiah also serve as types for Satan and the Antichrist. Interestingly, Isaiah also writes about the Assyrian. So Isaiah uses both the Assyrian and the king of Babylon when he's talking about Satan. So it's interesting. And this language about a fatal wound is eerily reminiscent of the head wound of the beast in Revelation 13:3 and 4. So Nahum 3:19 says, there is no healing for your wound, your injury is fatal. And Revelation 13:3 and 4 says, I saw that one of the heads of the beast seemed wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. The whole world marveled at this miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. They worshiped the dragon for giving the beast such power, and they also worshiped the beast. So that, I think, could be another connection between Nahum and the book of Revelation. And I'm going to leave the final word for our study in Nahum to the Apostle John, Revelation 18:20. He says, rejoice over her fate, O heaven and people of God and apostles and prophets, for at last God has judged her for your sakes.